Masechet Ketubot Daf Ayin, and we begin the 7th perek. Remember, we called Masechet Ketubot Shas Katan. It has every subject in it. And now we're going to be approaching the subject of Nedarim, which is also going to be the next Masechet. Hamadir et ishto milehanot lo ad sheloshim yom ya'amid parnas yater mikan yosi v'yiten ketubah. A man makes a vow that his wife cannot have any benefit from him. This is a problem because he is required by the ketubah to give her sustenance, and now he's prohibited from doing so. So they cannot remain married. If it's a short term, meaning less than a month, then he can get around his vow by appointing a trustee, and we'll see exactly how this works, but the trustee will give her food for that month. The man will pay back the trustee, and that way he is feeding her indirectly, so he's fulfilling his ketubah requirement, even though he's not violating his vow. But if it's for longer, if he takes a vow for any longer than 1 month, for 2 months, 3 months, then he has to divorce her, because this is not a sustainable marriage to have to always go through a trustee. You know, she says she can't say pass the salt. She has to tell someone else to tell him pass the salt. So this is impossible. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'Yisrael chodesh echad yikayem u'shnayim yosi v'yiten ketubah. Bekohen shenayim yikayem u'shlosha yosi v'yiten ketubah. Rabbi Yehuda agrees when it comes to an Israelite that if it's a month, if he vows against her receiving benefit from him for a month, then they can remain married and they'll use the trustee. But if it's for 2 months, then he has to divorce her. He has to pay the ketuvah because he's the one that made the vow. He ruined the marriage, so he still owes her a ketuvah. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, if he is a kohen, then this is a bigger problem, because if he divorces her and then they change their minds and they actually like each other, likely the reason that he made the divorce in the first place because they're in a fight. And so he says, I'm not giving anything to you, I'm not feeding you, you cannot have any benefit from me. So, okay, that makes sense, that led to the divorce. But let's say they change their mind later. So if it's Israel, they can always remarry, as long as she didn't marry anybody else in between. But if he is a Kohen, they cannot remarry. So therefore the Rabbi Yehuda says, give it a longer runway. If he vows for 2 months that she cannot benefit from him, then let it go and use the third party trustee. If it's for 3 or more months, then he has to give a ketubah. That's case number 1. Case number 2, Hamadir et ishto shelo tit'om echad mikol ha'perot yosi v'yiten ketubah. Man says, I prohibit you, my wife, from having a particular type of produce. No grapes for you. You cannot have grapes. So this is a problem. He has to provide for her, and so now she cannot have this particular item. She may feel tortured by not being able to have grapes, and so he's not allowed to sustain this marriage in such a way, and therefore he must divorce her, and he has to pay the ketuvah, either because even if she made the vow and he sustained it, or he made a vow in a similar way, he has to give the divorce right away. Interestingly, here we don't even give him a month; he has to give a divorce that day, because unlike in the first clause where he said, I'm not giving you anything, but she can go and find food in another way, herself. Here, it's making a prohibition that she cannot take part of a particular pleasure, a particular food, and so he has no right to do that. If he does, then he has to divorce her right away. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'Yisrael yom echad yekayem shenayim yosi v'yiten ketubah. Kohen shenayim yekayem shelosha yosi v'yiten ketubah. Rabbi Yehuda, similar to the first case, says if it's a case of an Israelite, then if he says just 1 day, all right, that's fine. But if he says it for more than 1 day, you can't have grapes for more than 1 day, then he has to divorce her and pay a ketuvah. If it's a Kohen, though, we want to give it a little more time, because once they divorce, they can't remarry. So we'll allow such a vow. It says, I prohibit you from having grapes for 2 days, they remain married. But if he says for 3 days, then he has to divorce her. Third case, Hamadir et ishto shelo titkashet be'echad mikol haminin yosi v'yiten ketubah. A man vows that his wife cannot adorn herself with a particular type of jewelry or perfume, And this also is restricting her, and he's not allowed to do this. If he does so, this is against his marriage obligations, and he has to divorce her, and he has to pay the ketubah. Rabbi Yosef Omer, ba'aniyot shelo natan kispa, ba'ashirot sheloshim yom. Rabbi Yosef limits it and says it depends. If it's a poor family, a poor woman, where she's not often putting jewelry on and putting perfume on, only once in a while, then if he says you're never allowed to put this particular perfume on, he has to divorce her. But if he gives a time limit and says for the next 6 months you can't do so, so in any case she's not doing this on a regular basis, then they can stay together. In other words, he's not putting her out of her way and making her more limited or suffering more than her normal practice. But if it's a rich person where she does often put on this jewelry or put on this perfume, then up to 30 days, okay, up to 30 days, not everybody does, but even rich people, but more than 30 days, then it is an imposition on her. He has to divorce her and pay the ketubah. All right, now regarding the first case, when the husband prohibits her from getting any benefit from him, why would his vow be effective in the first place? After all, he is absolutely obligated to pay for her sustenance, and therefore, since he's already obligated, and she even has a lien on him to pay for that, so how can he possibly make a vow that would be against his prior commitment? So therefore the vow should be null and void. Does he have the ability to undo his own obligation from the ketubah? So why should they have to get divorced? Just say your vow is null and void. After all, look at the case the other way around, where we say precisely that. V'atenan konam she'eni osa lepicha eno sarich lehafer. If a woman says, it's forbidden that I will not do any work for you. It's forbidden for me to do any work from you for your mouth. And any work that I do, you cannot benefit from. She makes that. And also the man does not have to nullify the vow because it's already null and void, because she is already obligated from the stipulation of the marriage to do those chores around the house and do those things for him. Alma, kevan de meshabed ale, lav kol kemineh, de mafka le lishibudeh. We learn from the Mishnah Dedarim that because she is already obligated to him, she does not have the power to undo it with a vow. The vow is null and void. Hachanameh, kevan de meshubad la, lav kol kemineh, de mafka la lishibudeh. Here also we should say that since he is obligated to her to provide her sustenance, it was not in his power to undo his obligation. It should be null and void, and then they could remain married. So that's the question. So we're going to see a couple of answers. First answer is that since he could say to her, you keep your earnings and sustain yourself, and I'm not going to feed you, right? I'm not going to feed you, and you'll feed yourself from your own wages. Since a man could say that, so when he vows and says, I am going to give you no benefit, it's the same as him saying, I also will not collect your wages, which he has a legal right to do. Therefore, it does not undo the marriage. It does not violate his obligation, because he has a way to keep his own money and not feed her by her feeding herself. Okay, now we say, hold on, let's try that in the other case where she is the one that makes a vow not to do any work for him. Wouldn't we say the same thing? If we agree with the opinion of Rav Huna Amarav, who we saw earlier, and he says, if a woman says to a man, she can say to a man, I don't want your food, and I am not doing work for you. I will keep my own wages, and I will pay for my own food. According to Rav, she has a right to say that. So in that case, then how would we explain the Mishnah Nedarim, where when she makes a vow that I will not do any work for your benefit, why does he not need to nullify it? Why do we consider already nullified? It should be a valid vow, because we would say, when she says, I will do no benefit for you, it would be as if she says, I'm keeping my earnings and I don't want your food, which is a legal thing. So then, if he doesn't like that, he should have to nullify it. So too, in the case of the Mishnah in Nedarim, where she doesn't make this full formulation, she only says, I am not doing any work for you. Why don't we insert that stipulation and presume that's what she meant, that since she could say, I don't need your food, and I am not doing any work for you. Since she could say that, so even if she only says half the formula, that I'm not doing any work for you, it's as if she said, I'm not doing any work for you, and you don't give anything to me. And therefore, her vow should be perfectly valid, because it is in her legal right to do so. And in that case, the man should be required to nullify, and it's not null and void on its own, because it's actually a legal formulation. So if we assume that saying half the formula is the same as saying the full formula regarding the man, then it has to be the same regarding the woman, and this comes to a contradiction with the Mishnah. Ela lo tema naase, ela beomer la, si maase yadayich bimzonotayich. Okay, rather, we're not talking about a case where we say it's as if he said the full formula, but rather our Mishnah here in Ketubot is when he actually said the full formula, even though the Mishnah doesn't say all that, we'll assume it, that he says, listen, you keep your earnings, and I am not feeding you. Okay, which he has a legal right to say. Ihachi parnas lamala. If so, that she is feeding herself with her own earnings, what do I need the third-party trustee for? Why do I need a trustee to give her food on my behalf? She has her own food. The answer is bidela safka. Could be that she doesn't make enough for her own sustenance. She only makes half the amount that she needs to eat, and therefore he's going to have to fill in the rest. So the rest that he's filling in, that he'll do through a third party. Wait, now you went too far the other way, because if she is not making enough for her own needs, then the original question comes back, that he said he's not going to feed her, but he's required to feed her. In other words, if he says, you keep your earnings and feed yourself, that's fine as long as she makes enough to feed herself. But if not, then the husband still has an obligation to feed her. And since he has an obligation to feed her, and he made a vow that he's not going to give anything to her, then we come back to the very same question we started with. Why is his vow not null and void? How can he make a vow to undo his basic obligation? Amar Rav Ashi, here's an answer. B'mesapeket lidvarim gedolim ve'ena maspeket lidvarim ketanim. We're talking about a case where she does make enough for her major needs, basic needs of bread and some hummus and some olives, basic needs, but she doesn't make enough for other smaller luxury items, getting a manicure, that she doesn't make enough. And so it's for those items where he makes a vow not to give her those items, and therefore, since he's not obligated to give her provide for a manicure every week, his vow therefore would take effect. Now we ask, these small things, what could be the case? If she's accustomed to them, that's her standard of living, so then she's accustomed, and he has to provide it. If that's what he's, this whole time she's used to a manicure every week, then he has to provide that. And if he vows against giving her anything, then it should be null and void, because he's obligated. And she doesn't normally get those things, she's not accustomed to getting a manicure every week, then why would he have to get a third party to give it to her? He's not obligated at all. So either he has to do it, and then the vow is void, or he doesn't need to, and then he wouldn't need a third party to give it to her. So we answer, we're talking about a case where she was used to getting this luxury item when she was in her father's house, but once she got married, even though she has a legal right to say, you have to provide for me as I'm used to, but when they were married, she lowered herself and forwent that obligation and says, I will lower myself and I'll forget about the manicures. And she can say to him, until now that you were not in a fight with me and you did not make a vow, so I lowered myself and I was happy to forego that right. But now that you made a vow not to provide me anything, I am not willing to lower myself. Now I demand what's coming to me. So that's kind of that kind of case where it's somewhat in between. Okay, fine, we'll accept that. But what's the difference between before 30 days and after 30 days? How come they can remain married within 30 days and he has to provide it? He does have to provide it for her because it is her standard of living, but he can do so through a third party. Why not even more than 30 days? The answer is Ad sheloshim yom la sham'ai ba'inashe ve'lazila ba'mileta tefeh sham'ai ba'inashe ve'zila ba'mileta. It's because of the public shaming. Before 30 days, people aren't going to hear about it, right? If a couple is not speaking to each other, he's not providing for her just for a few days, so it still remains a private matter. But after 30 days, people take notice. What's going on? Did you hear? They're fighting. They're separated. And then it's embarrassing for her, and so he cannot demand from her to remain married in such a shameful state. So he has to divorce her and pay her ketubah because he made this terrible vow. All right, all that was one possible answer, and now a second one again to explain how come when he makes a vow, it's not null and void, since he has an obligation to provide for her. Maybe we're talking about a case where he made this vow before the nisu'in, while she was still living in her father's house. They did kiddushin. At that point of time, he is not required to feed her. She's still getting sustenance from her father. So, but they're in a marriage. This is a bad marriage from the start. And he says, I'm not providing for you. Well, at that point, he's allowed to say it because he doesn't have an obligation yet to provide for her. So the vow is valid. Okay, Arusa mi'it la mezoneh. Hold on. In Arusa, she's not getting sustenance anyway. So what does that mean that he says, I'm not going to sustain you? He wasn't providing anything anyway. We're talking about a case where the time came to marry and they didn't marry yet. They did kiddushin. They said, listen, on the 1st of Nisan, we're gonna get married. And he delays it. He wasn't ready. But we learned it's not. Once that time comes and it's his fault that they didn't get married, he, at that point, has to begin providing for her. If he's a Kohen, he can even give her tirumah. So we have a case here where it's not an official obligation. It's not an obligation of the ketuvah or on a deoraita level as it would be for a nisuah, but rather a derabanan level obligation because he did agree to that point, so he should have to provide for her. That's what we're talking about, that type of case. And that's why it works. Even though he's obligated, but it's on a lower level to Rabbanan. Therefore, when he makes a vow and says, you know what, I'm upset at you, I'm not going to provide for you anything, you can have no benefit from me, so that can be fulfilled even though he has a lower level obligation to provide for her. All right, we ask about this. Now, according to this reason, the second explanation, why is the difference between before 30 days and after? You can't say about public shame because they're not married yet. She's still living in her father's house, so no one would expect him to be providing for her. So if they are separated already, if he's not bringing over meals, no, it's not going to arouse any suspicion, and nobody would care. She can continue living like that without any public shame. So what's the difference? Ad sheloshim yom abed shaliach shelichuteh tefeh la'abid shaliach shelichuteh. Because before 30 days, the third party agent will carry out what he said, what he was tasked to do efficiently, right? Because, okay, better do it. But as time goes on, even this agent has other things to do, and he's going to start, not giving her the dessert, not giving her the salad, and being lazy. And this is not a sustainable way of living, of being provided, that they have to depend on, right? It works for short term, but not for long term. All right, that's the second answer, which is acceptable. Now we're going to offer a third answer, but we're going to reject it and go back to one of the first two. Or maybe he made the vow when they were only had kiddushin, and that's why it's a valid vow, even though he wasn't giving her food anyway. But then they did get married, and since the vow was already there at the time that they get married, the vow continues to be in force, and now he's not going to be giving her food while they're married. That's how the vow can be sustained even though they are married, and he's obligated because he made the vow before they were married. We ask, Niset ha sabra v'kibela. Wait a second. If she went ahead into the wedding ceremony, did the chuppah, and agreed to live with him, even though he made a vow, I mean, who in their right mind would do that? It means that she was okay with it. I don't know, she has food from another source, and she said, okay, fine, I don't mind being married to you. And if she accepts that upon herself, then she has to remain married. Why would he have to divorce her and give her a ketubah? Damra kisbura ani shani yachola lekabel achshav en ani yachola lekabel. The answer is, she said, I thought that I'd be able to live this way, and that I'd be okay, we'll live together. By the way, even though he says you cannot have any benefit from me, they can still have marital relations. This only would affect the food, clothing, things he has to provide for her. She said, I thought I would be okay and I'd be able to live this way. Now I realize that I'm unable to. So then she has a right to then come and demand, hey, you have to provide for me. And since you made the vow, you have to divorce and give me a ketubah. That's what the case we're talking about. Now, another problem. Wait a second. This reasoning that she can change her mind, we do apply that when it comes to a blemish. If either he or she goes into a wedding knowing that the other party has some kind of blemish, they have a wart or something, right? And they know about it, and they went into the marriage thinking that I thought I could live with it. If they decide later on, I knew about this blemish, but you know what? Now that we're married, I can't live this way. They have a right to divorce. That's true for a blemish. But regarding food, there is no such right. We don't find that a person can say such a thing. When it comes to food, everybody knows you really can't live without food. So there's nothing changing in her mindset that I thought I could live without food. Now I realize I can't. There's no new realization. But when it comes to a physical blemish, that the phrase warts and all, it comes from Oliver Cromwell in the 1600s when he had a portrait artist come to paint him. He says, I want you to paint me warts and all, right? And so this is a phrase that came to mean, I'll accept my marriage partner, warts and all, and it doesn't matter what we find later on. But that is actually psychologically not true. Sometimes a person thinks that, I can live with this wart, but then turns out that they didn't realize, because this is more subjective and can be subject to change. And therefore, this answer is not viable. A person is not going to be able to change, not going to change her mind, and think that she's okay before the marriage, before the nisuin, think that, okay, I'll live without food, and then realize, no, I can't live without food. No, if she agrees to it, she is stuck, and she would not deserve her ketubah. Rather, we're going to go back to one of the first two answers. All right, next question about the Mishnah. So again, the case is where a man says to his wife, I'm upset at you, I prohibit you from deriving any benefit from me. So this is a problem. How is it going to provide her food and sustenance? So for less than 30 days, he can still do it through a third party. The question is, isn't he still providing good things for her? He's doing it through a messenger. So what? I'm doing it through a messenger. If I give you a gift directly, or if I give you a gift through a friend, am I not still giving you benefit? Wouldn't that still be a violation of the vow? This is right. If I would go and tell my friend, hey, listen, can you give this sandwich to my wife? that certainly would be a problem. But if I go announce in public, anyone who gives food to my wife will not lose out, implying that I'll pay them back. That way, a person will go and they will, on their own, go and give a sandwich to my wife, and then they can come back to me, and I basically guaranteed I'll pay them back for it. But I did not actually send anyone. They're doing it of their own free will. That's the case we're talking about. Okay, wait a second. Even in that case, it's still doing it for me. It's still my messenger. How do we know? Look at this case in Gitin. Someone fell down into a pit, and he suspects he may not come out alive. So he calls out and says, if anyone can hear me, write a get for my wife. So that is valid. They can go and write and give a get on behalf of his wife. In other words, that's considered a shaliach. That's an agent, even though he didn't tell a specific person, because he's in the pit. He doesn't know who's listening. Even though he just made a general announcement, it's still considered a messenger. So too here, even though he made a general announcement, we should still consider it a direct message, and therefore a violation of the vow of him giving benefit to her. We answer, Hachi hashta. Wait, these two cases are not the same. Hatam kamar yichtov. Hachami amar kimi kamar yazun. Kol hazan kamar. So even though both cases have something in common, that they're giving a general statement to the public rather than a specific agent, nevertheless, there's a big difference between the two. In the case of Gitin, he said, whoever can hear this, you should write a bill of divorce. So he's giving a direct command. In our case, we didn't say that. He says, the husband says, whoever's listening, sustain my wife, give her a sandwich. He just says anyone who does it, it's a passive voice, they will not lose out. So it's a passive voice rather than an active verb, so that's permitted. Another problem. There's another case where we need to use a roundabout language, and that if someone's house is burning down on Shabbat, I'm not allowed to put out the house on Shabbat. There's no one in it. There's no problem. There's no worry of life at stake. It's just property. So I cannot violate Shabbat if it's not pikuach nefesh. However, the rabbis do allow a person, the homeowner, to come and say, and there's non-Jews around, is anyone who comes and puts out the fire will not lose out, right? I can't pay you now, but I will pay you for your services after Shabbat. Since he's only implying it, that's permitted. So bidleka hetiru. Now, from the fact that this phrase says the rabbis permitted it regarding a fire, it sounds like they permit it only in this specific case, bidleka lemutemai, and they're going to exclude another case. What are they excluding? Lav lemute kiavi hay gavna. Aren't they excluding something like our case where the man says, a vow, you cannot have any benefit from me, that if he comes and says a public announcement, anyone who feeds her, that this would not be a good loophole. We only accept a loophole regarding the fire on Shabbat, not other cases. And we say, no, Shabbat. No, we said, the Rabbi Ameh's statement that only in the deleka they permitted it. What he wanted to exclude is other Isurei Shabbat. In other words, another case that's similar to this. For example, if I'm in the mood for a steak on Shabbat, and I say, I don't have a steak. So I say, anyone who cooks me a steak, right now, they will not lose out. And then I'll pay them for the steak and for their services after Shabbat. No, that would not be allowed. There's no special need for that. And so it's obvious that they're doing it for me. So that would not be allowed. That's what he was coming to exclude. But only in this particular thing, when a house is burning down, that the rabbis did permit. But they only meant to exclude the steak example, other things on Shabbat. They were not talking at all or excluding the case of a vow. All right, so we're good so far with this answer. Another challenge though. Mativ Rabbah. Hamudad hana mechavero ve'en lo ma yochal yelech etzel chanvani haragil etzlo. If a person had a vow from deriving benefit from someone else. A says to B, I'm not giving you anything. They're in a fight. I will not not provide you anything. But B has no food, and after time, A kind of feels bad and wants to provide B with something, and is not able to undo the vow. So here's a loophole. He can go to a grocer that he always goes to, and they trust each other, and he says to his grocer, A says to the grocer he always uses, listen, this guy, Mr. B, I cannot give benefit to him directly. But I don't know what to do. So then the grocer will say, don't worry, I understand, I'll take care of it. The grocer will go give food to B. And later on, the grocer will go to A and collect from him. So this is the same, it's a third party. And that's allowed. So So it sounds from this Mishnah, it's a Mishnah Nedarim, that if you do it this way, it's permitted, but the Mishnah doesn't give the other loophole that we just mentioned, that you can go out in public and say, anyone who gives food to my wife will not lose out. It sounds like you have to do it in the grocer way and not in the public way. So it sounds like this is not a good solution. So we answer, Lami baya ka'amar. No, of course that case would be good. It's even better. Lami baya kol hazanu mafsid de la'alma ka'amar. If I go out in public where I'm not specifying any particular agent, I'm just calling out into the air. Anyone wants to do that, they will be paid back. That certainly is okay, because whoever goes and does it, I might not even know the person. So that they're not doing it as my agent, they're doing it on their own. And that's permitted. אבל היי, כיוון דרגיל אצלו וכאמר לה, כמאן דאמר לה, זילהב לאט דמה, כמשמעלן. But I might have thought that this grocer, since I go to him all the time, and he knows me, and he's doing it basically for me, it's as if I'm going to him and telling him, you go give her the sandwich and I will pay you back. And that would be prohibited, because then I'm making a direct agent. So I might have thought that this would be prohibited. So therefore, this Mishnah comes to teach that even in this case, it's permitted, because I didn't tell him that directly. I just went and said, listen, I can't give him food. I don't know what to do. And the grocer figures that himself. But certainly, it would be permitted if we used this formula. Okay, more about that. More about this case that we just mentioned about the grocer, since we mentioned it already. Gufa. המודד ענה מחברו ואין לו מה יאכל, הולך חנווני, הרגיל אצלו, ואומר לו, איש פלוני מודד הנאה ממני, ואיני יודע מה יעשה לו, הוא נותן לו, הוא בא ונוטל מזה. So in the case of A said he's going to prohibit himself from giving anything to B, but then he feels bad for him, he's poor, and he wants to give him, he can do it by telling the grocer the problem, and the grocer will figure it out, give him food, and then collect from A. Okay, we saw that already. We continue. Beto libnot ugdero ligdor vesader liksor. What if there's other problems? A again said that he's going to give no benefit to B, but then B's house fell down, or his fence is broken, or he needs help in the field to cut the harvest, and A wants to help him, but now he's prohibited because he made the vow, but now he likes him and wants to, so he can do the same thing and go to some workers. So it goes to the workers that he knows, that he always works. He goes to his regular gardener and he tells them, listen, that guy, I can't give him any benefit, but he does need help with his fence, with his garden. Well, I don't know what to do. So they'll get the message. So then they'll go and help him build his house, build his fence, and they come back and they'll collect from A. Good. We continue. Still from that Mishnah in Nedarim. Next case is two people are walking along the way, and one person, call him B again, has nothing to eat, and A made a vow he's not going to give him that, he's not going to provide any benefit to him. Let's say if there's someone else also that's walking on the same path, so A can give a gift to Mr. C, and then Mr. C can hopefully decide that he will give the food to A. And then B can go and take it from C, and he can eat it. That's fine, because I didn't entrust C as a messenger. I give this to B, but rather I give it to C as a gift. and he can do what he wants with it. And then B will take it from him. That's fine. But let's say there's nobody else there to give it as a gift, to be the intermediary. So then A can take the food, put it on a rock, or on a fence, just leave it out there and say, this is ownerless. Anyone who wants to come can take it. Now, it's a funny scene because there's no one around for miles and miles, right? We're talking about a case, they're on the road. They're the only two people on the road, nobody else around. But nevertheless, he wants to be able to share food with his friend who's hungry, even though he has a vow against him. He puts it on the rock. Hey, anyone who wants to come and take it can come and take it. And the other one can come and take it. That's permitted because he didn't give it to him directly. He went through the third party, in this case is the rock. Rabbi Yosef says it's prohibited. What is this, some kind of trick, right? Everybody knows what's going on here. You're not really giving it to the third party as a gift. You're not really putting it on the rock as ownerless, right? There's nobody else around to take it, so you can't use this kind of loophole, right? We see your intention, right? Rabbi Yosef would be probably against selling chametz, right? If the person you sold, the non-Jew you sold the chametz to, would really come and you would hesitate to give it to him, then we would know that that was not a real sale. And same thing here. This does not look like it's a real gift. Gezerah mishum maaseh de bet chodon. Rava explains what's the reasoning behind Rabbi Yosef. Why is he worried about this? Because of an incident that happened in Bet Chodon. The full incident is mentioned in the Mishnah there, and it's talking about a case where some father is prohibited from deriving any benefit from his son. They got into a fight. The son says, you cannot have any benefit from me. But then the son made a wedding for his son, and he felt bad, and he wanted his father to be there at the wedding. But what can he do? He can't invite his father because that would violate the vow. And so what he did is, he said, everything in the wedding, all the food, everything here, I am giving as a gift to Mr. C. And that way, it's really Mr. C's food, and then the father can come and he can sit and partake of the wedding. What happened though? Mr. C went and said, oh, it's a gift to me? Thank you very much. You know what? I want to dedicate all of this to the Bet HaMikdash. He sanctifies all the food. And this is now no one can eat from it because it's all sanctified. And then the one who's the son who's making the wedding comes to him and says, wait a second, I didn't give all this to you as a gift so that you can make it sanctified. I gave it as a gift so that my father could come. So Rabbi Yosef says, see, when people give a gift like that, they're not really sincere, they're not fully giving it, they're only giving it with certain limitations. So since it's not a full gift, it's just a loophole, and it's not a sincere one, and therefore it doesn't work. And even in the case where a person is sincere and fully gives it, we still have to make a gezerah, because sometimes people will not be sincere, and that's why Rabbi Yosef does not go for this loophole. But the majority opinion says, it's fine, since technically I did not violate the vow. Doesn't matter that my intention was ultimately to get around the vow. It still is permitted. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.